The day my mother's lawyer called me, not my sister, not my father, just me, I knew something was different. My sister had been the favorite her entire life. Every award, every celebration, every dinner table conversation, always about her, always centered on her, always beginning and ending with her name. I had spent 30 years being invisible in my own family. 30 years of sitting at the edge of things. 30 years of watching my sister get the applause while I quietly paid the bills nobody talked about. 30 years of being the background character in a story that was supposed to be mine too. But that phone call, that one quiet, unexpected phone call on a Tuesday afternoon, was about to make every single one of those 30 years worth every second of silence. Because somebody had been watching the whole time. And she had left me everything. My name is Maya. I am 30 years old. I grew up in a house that had 2 daughters but only ever really celebrated one of them. I am not the one they celebrated. But I am the one who ended up with the house. This is my story. If you enjoy stories like this, please hit the subscribe button and turn on your notification bell so you don't miss any of our stories. Also like and comment, tell me where in the world you are watching from and what time it is there. I read every single comment. Let me tell you what growing up in my family actually felt like, because from the outside it probably looked fine. 2 parents, a nice enough house, a family that showed up to things together. What it felt like from the inside was different. My older sister Rachel was, and there is no other way to say this, everything my parents had ever wanted in a child. She was sharp and confident and driven from the time she was old enough to have opinions. Straight A student, debate team captain, the kind of person who walked into a room and immediately became the center of it without appearing to try. My parents adored her, not in the quiet, steady way parents are supposed to love children, but in the active, demonstrative, loud way that leaves very little room for anyone else. Rachel's report cards were framed on the wall. Mine were glanced at and set aside. Rachel's achievements were announced at family dinners. Mine were nodded at, if they were mentioned at all. When people came to the house, my parents introduced Rachel first, talked about Rachel longest, and would sometimes forget mid-conversation to mention that there was a second daughter standing right there. I stopped expecting equal treatment by the time I was 12. By the time I was 20, I had simply built my life around the fact that in my family I was the background. I was the quiet one, the artistic one, the one who figured out very early that the path of least resistance was to ask for nothing, make no noise, and find meaning somewhere other than the dinner table. I found it in my art, in books, in letters I wrote to people who actually wrote back. And on my 30th birthday, a day my family acknowledged with a group text and a photo of a store-bought cake, my mother called. Not to sing happy birthday. Not to ask how I was doing or what I had planned or whether I wanted to have dinner together. She called to ask if she could borrow money. I had been lending my family money for 6 years. It had started small. A grocery run here, a bill there. The kind of thing you do without thinking when you love people and they need help. But over time it had grown. A car payment for Rachel when she was between jobs, a holiday deposit for my parents, a regular monthly transfer that had quietly become expected without anyone ever officially asking for it to be. I was working 2 jobs. I lived in a small apartment with second-hand furniture, and a kitchen window that let in a draft I had learned to dress around rather than fix. And every month I sent money home because that was what I believed family meant. Nobody ever paid me back. Nobody ever asked how I was managing. Not once in 6 years did anyone say, "Maya, are you okay? Maya, is this too much? Maya, we see what you are doing for us." Then one evening I was at my mother's house helping her with something on her phone. She always needed help with her phone, and a notification lit up the screen. A group chat. My father's name. My mother's name. Rachel's name. My name was not there. I scrolled up before I could stop myself. The last message was from Rachel. "Don't tell Maya about the dinner. She'll make it weird." I found out the rest through Instagram. Rachel had been promoted. A significant promotion, new title, new salary, the kind of professional leap our parents had always dreamed of for her. And to celebrate, the 3 of them had gone to one of the most expensive restaurants in the city. Photos from the evening were posted to Rachel's account by the following morning. My parents beaming. Rachel in the center, champagne glass raised, laughing in the particular way she laughed when she knew she was being photographed. The date on the photos was the same evening I had worked a double shift to cover a payment I had made on my mother's behalf the week before. I stared at those photos for a long time. 2 days later my mother texted asking if I could increase my monthly transfer. Things are a bit tight. I looked at that message for a long time. Then I put my phone face down on my kitchen counter. and for the first time in 6 years I did not reply. That silence was the hardest thing I had ever done in my life. Not because I was afraid of my family's reaction, but because not fixing things, not smoothing things over, not being the quiet one who absorbs everything and asks for nothing in return, that went against every habit I had built since I was 12 years old. But I sat with it. I turned off my read receipts. I let the messages come in without answering. And in that quiet, the particular quiet of choosing yourself for the first time, something in me began to shift, to loosen. Like a knot I had been carrying for 30 years was finally slowly coming undone. 3 days into my silence, my phone rang. Not my mother. Not Rachel. A number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer. The woman on the other end introduced herself as Judith. She was calm and precise in the way of someone who delivers significant news regularly, and has learned to do it gently without making it smaller than it is. She told me a relative had passed away, and named me as the sole beneficiary of their estate. I asked who. She said the name. And my legs stopped working and I sat down on my kitchen floor. The name Judith said was Constance. My maternal great-aunt, a woman I had met exactly 3 times in my life. She had lived alone in a large house in the countryside, and my mother had always spoken about her with a particular dismissiveness. Eccentric, difficult, not worth the drive. A woman to be tolerated at the edges of family events and mostly ignored. I had not ignored her. When I was 22, at a family gathering where I had sat in my usual corner watching everyone else be loud and celebrate it, Constance had come and sat beside me. She hadn't tried to pull me into the crowd or tell me to smile more or ask me when I was going to do something impressive enough to get my parents' attention. She had just sat there and asked me, quietly like it genuinely mattered to her, what I was working on. I had told her about my art. She had listened like it was the most interesting thing she had heard all year. When she left that evening, she pressed a small card into my hand with her address on it. "Write to me," she said. I write back. She was telling the truth. I went to my wardrobe that night after Judith's call and I found the box. 14 letters over 8 years. Constance in her own handwriting. Sharp, funny, opinionated, deeply curious. She asked about my paintings. She asked about my opinions on books she was reading. She asked what I thought about things, actual things, with the genuine interest of someone who expected a real answer. She had signed every single letter the same way. From the one who sees you. In the last letter, written 8 months before she died, she had written one line I had read and not fully understood at the time. "I have made sure that the people who overlooked you will one day have to look directly at what they missed." I had thought it was a figure of speech. It was not a figure of speech. Judith walked me through the details over 2 separate meetings. Constance's estate included her countryside property, large, well-maintained, set on several acres of quiet land, an investment portfolio she had been building carefully for years, and a savings account that had been growing with the same quiet intention. The total value was just under $1.2 million, left entirely and exclusively to Maya. I sat across from Judith in her office and I kept my face calm and my hands still, and I nodded at the right moments, and it was only when I got to my car in the parking lot that I put my hands over my mouth and let myself understand what had just happened. This woman I had met 3 times, who had known me only through letters, had spent 8 years quietly building something with my name on it, while I was working double shifts to send money to a family that forgot to invite me to celebrations. While I was reading her letters in my cold apartment and feeling, for a few pages at a time, genuinely seen. She had seen me. And then she had done something about it. But it was at the bottom of the legal document, almost missed, where Constance showed me just how clearly she had understood my family. There was a clause. It stated that if any member of my immediate family attempted to contest the will or pursue any legal claim against the estate within 12 months of Constance's passing, the entire estate would revert to a charitable trust. Constance had known. She had known exactly what would happen when my family found out. She had known before I did. And she had built a wall around me before I even knew I was going to need one. I called Judith from the parking lot. I asked, "Does my family know yet?" Judith said no. I was the only person they had contacted. I closed my eyes. I said, "Don't contact them yet. I'll be in touch." On a Saturday morning, I drove to the countryside alone. I had the address from Judith's paperwork and I drove the 2 hours with the windows cracked and the radio off, letting myself exist in the quiet of it all before I had to think about what came next. The house was exactly what I had imagined from Constance's letters, and nothing like I had expected. Large without being showy. A garden that had been tended with real care. Trees old enough to have watched decades pass. A front door painted a particular shade of deep blue that I knew, Immediately, I would never change. I stood in front of it for a long time. Then I went inside. The house smelled like books and old wood and something floral I couldn't name. On the walls were photographs, shelves full of well-read books with notes in the margins, a garden through the back window that looked like someone had spent years making it exactly right. And on the kitchen table, set there deliberately waiting, a sealed envelope with my name on it in Constance's handwriting. I sat down at her table. I opened it. For pages. I read every word twice. Constance wrote about watching my family from a distance for decades, about the particular way families choose favorites and the damage that choice does, not just to the one overlooked but to everyone, including the one held up too high. She wrote about deciding 8 years ago when I first wrote to her that she was going to do something quiet and deliberate and lasting. She wrote about the investment portfolio, about the property, about the decisions she had made one by one over 8 years with my name in mind, and the deep private satisfaction she had felt watching it grow into something real. She wrote about my mother, not with anger, with something more like tired clarity. I told your mother once that she had 2 daughters and she was only raising one of them. She told me I was being difficult. I told her she would understand me one day. I believe that day is coming soon. On the last page she wrote about me. She wrote about my letters, about what they had meant to her, that someone had taken the time, in a world that communicated in short bursts, to write her real thoughts in real sentences on real paper. She said my letters had made her last years feel less alone. She said she hoped the house felt like home. She said she hoped I would fill it with the kind of life that nobody would ever make me feel was not enough. I sat at Constance's kitchen table for a long time after I finished reading. The garden outside was very still. The house was very quiet. I did not cry right away. I think I was too full of something for tears to find a way through this overwhelming, complicated feeling of being known, of having been seen, carefully and consistently, by someone who had decided that seeing me wasn't enough and had spent 8 years making sure it counted. Then the tears came, and I let them. I drove home. I went back to work. I did not transfer any money that month. My mother's texts became more frequent, more urgent. Then Rachel called, something she almost never did. Her voice was warm and bright in that particular way it gets when she wants something and is building toward it. She wanted to have lunch. Just the 2 of us. Sister time, she said. I said yes. She chose an expensive restaurant. She ordered generously, which told me she was planning to let this land on me. She talked about herself for 40 minutes. Her promotion, her apartment, a trip she was planning. I listened and nodded and watched her the way I had been watching people my whole life, from the background, noticing things. Then she shifted. Casually. Smoothly. The way Rachel always pivoted, so practiced it almost looked natural. She mentioned that our parents were having some financial difficulty, that she had been thinking about how the family could come together. That Maya, quiet, dependable, always there Maya, might be in a position to help. She was building to the ask. I watched her face and I thought about Constance's letter and the clause and the 8 years of quiet planning that had led to this exact moment, and I felt something move through me that was very close to peace. My phone rang. Judith's office. I held up one finger to Rachel and I answered. I listened for 30 seconds. I said yes. Let's proceed. I hung up. I looked at Rachel. And for the first time all lunch I smiled. 48 hours later my mother called 4 times in a row. I listened to her voicemail that evening. 3 minutes of her voice moving through confusion, then a strange forced brightness, then the suggestion that as my mother she should naturally be involved in any decisions about the estate, as though the estate were a family matter to be divided at a table rather than a legal document with her daughter's name alone on every page. Rachel called the next morning. The warmth was completely gone. We need to talk about Constance's house, she said. I agreed to a family meeting. I drove to my parents' house and sat across from all 3 of them. My mother, my father, Rachel, arranged like a panel. My mother spoke first. Constance had clearly not been in her right mind. The will should be contested. The family should benefit equally from any inheritance. I let her finish. Then I put a single piece of paper on the table and slid it across. I watched my mother pick it up. I watched her read it. I watched her face change. Rachel read it over her shoulder. My father sat back in his chair. The clause. All of it spelled out in clear, plain language. Any contest, any legal challenge, any attempt to claim any portion of this estate, the entire thing goes to charity. Not to Maya reduced. Not to Maya sharing. Gone. All of it. The room went completely silent. Then Rachel said, not as an accusation but as pure recognition, Like she was finally seeing Constance clearly for the first time. She planned this. I said yes. 8 years ago. Rachel recovered quickly. She always did. Within 60 seconds she had shifted entirely. Her posture changed, her tone warmed, and she launched into a speech about family unity and fresh starts and how none of this needed to be adversarial. She suggested the property could be a family retreat, that they could all benefit together, that this was an opportunity for a new beginning. It was a good performance. It always was. I waited until she finished. Then I opened my phone. I pressed play. I put it on the table. 40 seconds of audio from our lunch 2 days ago. Rachel's voice, warm and building and unmistakably pivoting toward a financial request. The exact tone she had just used again in this room, performed for the same reason, packaged differently. The recording ended. I put my phone back in my pocket. I looked at my mother. I said, I love you. I have always loved you. But I have been funding this family for 6 years while attending none of its celebrations. That ends today. I stood up. I picked up my bag. I walked to the door and I stopped. I turned around one more time. I looked at the table where I had grown up, the one where Rachel's report cards were framed and mine were knotted at, where birthday dinners happened that I was not always told about, where 6 years of financial dependence had been accepted as simply the way things were. I said one more sentence. My mother started to cry. Rachel looked at the table. My father said nothing. I closed the door behind me. What I said was this. Constance saw me when none of you were looking. I think you should spend some time thinking about what that says. Not about her but about you. I drove home. I did not cry. I made tea. I sat at my own kitchen table and I genuinely felt, in a way I had not felt since I was a child before I had learned not to expect it, like the weight of needing to be seen by people who had chosen not to look had finally, completely lifted off my shoulders. 3 weeks later an envelope arrived at my apartment. My mother's handwriting on the front. For pages. She wrote about her own childhood, about Constance, about the difficult history between them that I had never known about the distance that had grown into habit and then into something she had stopped questioning. She wrote about Rachel. She wrote something I had never expected to read, that the favoritism had not come from love but from fear, that she had recognized Rachel's intensity early and had managed it rather than addressed it, and that managing it had meant consistently placing it above everything else, including me, without ever fully letting herself see what that cost. She wrote that she was sorry. Not a small procedural sorry. A real one, the kind that takes up space on a page and doesn't ask for anything in return. On the last page she wrote something I had waited my entire life to read. I folded the letter when I finished. I held it in my hands for a while. Then I picked up my phone. I did not call my mother. I called Rachel. Rachel answered on the first ring like she had been waiting. I didn't mention the letter. I didn't mention the inheritance or the recording or anything that had happened in that family meeting. I said, I want to show you something. Can you drive? I gave her Constance's address. She arrived to find me standing at the front door with the key in my hand, and I want to tell you about the expression on my face when she pulled up, because Rachel told me later that it was the thing she remembered most from that whole day. She said I looked like someone who had finally arrived somewhere after a very long journey. Not triumphant. Not angry. Just at peace. Completely and entirely at peace. I opened the door and I walked her through. The books with their notes in the margins. The garden through the back window. The photographs on the walls. Decades of a life lived quietly and fully and on her own terms. The kitchen that still smelled like the tea Constance had made every morning. Rachel walked through it all slowly, quietly, in a way I had never seen Rachel be quiet before. And then we reached the study. On the desk there was a framed photograph. It was a photo of me. Taken from a distance, candid, without my knowledge, at a market somewhere, looking at something, laughing in the free, open way you only laugh when you don't know anyone is watching. When you are just yourself. On the back, in Constance's handwriting. This is what joy looks like when nobody is watching. Rachel stood in front of that photograph for a long time. I stood behind her and I watched her read those words and I watched something shift in her face. Something real underneath all the performance and the confidence and the careful management of how she was perceived. Something that looked, for just a moment, like genuine grief. Not for the inheritance. Not for any of the things that had been said in that family meeting. For 30 years of a sister she had never properly looked at. She said, quietly, almost to herself, not performing it for anyone. She really did see you. I said yes. She did. We stood there for a moment. Two sisters in a house that had been built, in a way, for exactly this moment. For the one who had been overlooked to finally have somewhere to stand that was entirely her own. And for the one who had done the overlooking to finally clearly see what she had missed. I locked up the house. I drove home as the evening was coming in, past the town I grew up in, past the street my parents lived on, past the restaurant where I had sat across from Rachel and pressed record before she could finish her sentence. I did not stop. I had somewhere to be. The house was waiting. And for the first time in 30 years, so was I. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for staying with this story all the way through. Stories like this one about being unseen, about quiet love, about the people who notice us when the ones closest to us don't. These are the stories that matter. These are the ones that stay with you. And that is exactly why we need you here with us every single day. We are building something real with this channel. A community of people who believe that the truth always comes out, that patience is its own kind of power, and that being overlooked is never the end of the story. Every day we bring you a new story. Some will make you cry. Some will make you cheer so loud your neighbors wonder about you. Some will stay in your mind for days after you close the screen. We don't want you to miss a single one. We have viewers watching from every corner of this planet, and every comment reminds us why we do this. Come back tomorrow. Come back every day. We will always be here with something new, something real, something worth your time. See you in the next story.